He made a commitment so extreme people called him mad. For 47 years he lived atop a giant pillar, exposed to the scorching sun, the bone-chilling cold, and the silence of the desert sky. His feats made some uncomfortable. His superiors ordered him to come down. What Simeon did next surprised everyone. Telenesis, Byzantine Empire, modern-day Syria, 400 AD. A young shepherd boy would normally be out with his flock, but today it was snowing, so he did something he rarely did. He walked into a church, and everything changed. He heard words he had never truly heard before. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after justice. The words were ancient, they were simple. To most who passed through those doors, they were wallpaper, familiar, faded, unremarkable. But something in that boy cracked open. Not a gradual awakening, not a slow turning of the heart. Something broke through, sudden and total, like light through a collapsed ceiling. The words didn't just reach him, they remade him. He sat with them, he turned them over, he couldn't put them down. Who are the poor in spirit? Where do the hungry receive their fill, if not from food? What kind of kingdom was this, and why did it feel more real than anything he had ever touched? He sought out a wise elder of the church and laid his questions at the man's feet. The elder listened patiently. He explained that the path of Christ was a path of detachment, that the soul must loosen its grip on created things, on comfort and pleasure and the approval of the world, and fix itself entirely on God. He spoke of renunciation, of purity of heart, of the narrow road that few were willing to walk. Then the elder finished and went about his day. But Simeon couldn't move on. The words had lodged somewhere deep, and they would not let go. He didn't just want to understand the teaching, he wanted to live it, all of it, down to the bone. He began to fast, then to fast longer. He prayed through the night, through the cold, through the hunger, through the hours when most men were sleeping. He did penance, he kept vigil. He was 15 years old, and he was giving everything he had, because he had heard something that made everything else seem small. He had done everything he believed was required of a man seeking monastic life. He had emptied himself. He had practiced what the elders preached. So when he arrived at the doors of the local monastery, young, burning with zeal, certain of his calling, he expected to be welcomed in. They said no. So he laid down in front of the door. He refused to eat. He refused to drink. He refused to move. Days passed. The cold came and went. The monks stepped around him, and still he didn't move. Finally, worn down by the sheer immovability of this boy's desire, the abbot relented. The doors opened. Inside, the monks had seen it before. The young men who arrived ablaze and burned out within a year. The ones who confused emotion for vocation, fervor for faith. They had learned not to be impressed by enthusiasm. But Simeon was not enthusiasm. He ate one meal a week on Sunday. He bound heavy chains to his body and wore them through his days and his nights. He tied a rope so tightly around his waist that when monks finally discovered it, it had to be cut away from his flesh. During the 40 days of Lent, he took nothing. No food, no water, nothing. The monks watched. 9 years passed. 9 years of watching this man strip himself of every comfort, every relief, every concession to his own humanity. 9 years of practices so severe they had no category for them. And then they called him in. The men who had at first refused him entry, who had doubted his resolve, who were themselves no strangers to sacrifice and penance, these men looked across at Simeon and told him that he had gone too far, that his austerities were excessive, that the life that he was living was not compatible with life in community, that he had to go. So he did. He wandered out into the open world, no monastery, no cell, no community. He found an abandoned well and climbed down into it. It was dark, it was still, it was enough. Then the abbot had a vision. Angels appeared to him and told him plainly, "Bring Simeon back." So he sent word. Simeon returned. and then, not long after, they asked him again to leave. So he went further. He found a cave at the edge of the desert. He made it his home for 3 years. 3 years of stone walls and near total silence, of hunger and cold, and the slow, deliberate work of a soul being drawn ever closer to God. No comfort to speak of, no relief to lean on, just the cave and the darkness, and the one he believed was worth it all. But word spread. It always does. First, a handful of people made the journey into the desert to find him, drawn by rumors of a man who seemed to have left the world behind. Then dozens, then hundreds. They came from distant cities. They crossed long stretches of wilderness. They came carrying their grief, their confusion, their questions about God and suffering, and what any of it meant. Simeon received them. He had been a shepherd as a boy, tending animals, guiding the flock. Now, years later, he found himself a shepherd again. Not of animals, but of souls. He fed them not with bread, but with something that seemed to those who received it to last much longer. He loved these people. He saw in each of them a child of God, and he gave them whatever he had. But he was also seeking something that they could not give him, something that required silence, something that required stillness, something all this holy noise, however beloved, was slowly drowning out. He couldn't go further into the desert. He couldn't disappear, so he went up. He built a platform, 6 feet off the ground. He stood on top of it and prayed. Through the wind, through the rain, through the full weight of the Syrian sun beating down on him without mercy. He ate almost nothing. He slept almost never. Season after season he remained. And still the people came, looking up at him now, rather than sitting beside him, but coming all the same. He didn't build a pillar to escape the people. He built it to get closer to God. And somehow, the higher he climbed, the more they needed to follow. Then one day, his superiors arrived at the base of the pillar and looked up. They had concerns. A man who fasted this long, endured this much, subjected his body to this degree of suffering. Was it truly devotion? Or was it something else? Pride, perhaps. A craving for spectacle, dressed in the clothing of sanctity. They had seen holiness before. They weren't sure this was it. So they delivered their order. Come down. The desert heat had not broken him. The freezing nights had not moved him. Years of hunger, years of exposure, years of solitude that would have hollowed out a lesser man completely. None of it had brought him down from that platform. But they were ordering him down, and they expected him to refuse. If you want more stories from the lives of the saints, consider subscribing. Simeon looked at these men who had cast him out, men who had questioned him, tested him, never fully trusted the extremity of his path, men whose own penances, admirable as they were, did not approach what Simeon had quietly endured over decades, men who could not have fathomed what it cost to live the life he lived. A man who had reached the heights of prayer and mortification that Simeon had reached, a man who had, in some real sense, attained a deeper union with God than most souls ever know, knew exactly what he had to do. He began descending immediately, without a word, without a gesture of protest, without even a moment's hesitation. He didn't argue, he didn't explain himself, he didn't stop to weigh the injustice of it. He gathered his things and climbed down, because to Simeon, obedience to his superiors was obedience to Christ himself. And every chain he had worn, every sleepless night, every year on that pillar had been offered not for his own glory, but for God's. His superiors had their answer. They stopped him before he reached the ground. What pride looks like, they knew. What they had just witnessed was something else entirely. They told him to go back up. He climbed back to the top of that pillar and never came down again. Over the years that followed, as the crowds at the base of his pillar continued to grow, Simeon had new pillars built, each one taller than the last. 20 feet, 30, 50, until finally nearly 80 feet in the air. He found the height where the noise of the world thinned and the silence of heaven thickened, and he stayed there for 47 years. exposed to everything, protected by nothing, fed almost not at all, praying always. He was not a man running from the world, he was a man running toward God, and finding that the further he ran, the more the world came with him. So he built his pillar high and stood at the top of it like a burning lamp set on a lampstand, giving light to all those who could see. He had stripped himself of comfort, of approval, of safety, of the basic dignities most men cannot imagine surrendering. And what remained, what could not be stripped away, was the love so purified, so total, that people crossed deserts just to stand near it. He didn't choose his name, he lived it. And when the world finally went looking for a word to describe a man who stood between earth and heaven for half a century, they found one in the Greek: stylos, pillar. We know him today as Saint Simeon Stylites.